The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the vast, empty fields. Kira stood at the edge of the grass, her feet buried in the soft earth, her wings heavy by her sides. She had been here before, in this place where the wind whispered secrets and the silence was louder than any voice could be. The air smelled of dust and old promises. It had been months since they first came. The humans, with their strange ways and cold eyes, had found her. She had never asked to be found, but they saw her as something else, something useful. They called it her breeding season, but to Kira, it had been nothing more than a cycle of giving and giving until there was nothing left. At first, there had been hope that maybe they would see her as more than just a means to an end. But with every passing day, that hope had faded. She had become nothing more than an object to them, a tool to fulfill their needs. Her body had been used again and again until there was nothing left to give. She had been kept alive for their purposes, her freedom stolen, and her spirit slowly chipped away. Now, as the season came to an end, she was left standing here, staring at the horizon, waiting for something to change. Her wings, once full of energy and life, now sagged. She could feel the weight of them, just as she felt the weight of the days that had passed. Her body ached in places she didn't even know existed, as though the very act of surviving had worn her down to the bone. She had given them everything, and now it was over. But even in the silence, she could hear the echoes of their demands, the constant pressure, the never-ending use. It hurt. It hurt in ways she couldn't explain, ways that made her question if she would ever feel whole again. "I've given you everything," she whispered, the words escaping her lips with a heaviness that matched the weight in her heart. "Everything, and now it's time for me to go." But there was no answer. There never was. Her feet shifted, and she felt the ground tremble beneath her, just slightly, like a breath waiting to be released. The earth had always been patient with her, always there when she needed it. And today, it felt like it was waiting too, as if it could feel the emptiness inside her. Kira turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the barren land. The fields, once full of life, now felt cold, lifeless. It was as though the world itself had given up on her. She couldn't even remember when the last time she had felt truly alive was. Time had blurred together, each day indistinguishable from the next, each moment marked by a loss. "I just want to go home," she murmured, her voice thin and fragile, like the last threads of a dream that were slipping away. There was no answer, no sign that the humans would ever listen to her. They had used her, and now they were gone. And she? She was left alone in the aftermath, unsure of what came next. She had been cast aside, like so many before her, left to wander in a world that had no place for her. But as she stood there, in the quiet of the fields, something shifted within her. It wasn't a loud change, not like the thunder that came before a storm, but a quiet, subtle pull. It was a feeling of something stirring, deep inside. It was hope. For a moment, Kira closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel it. She had given everything, yes, but that didn't mean she was done. It didn't mean she couldn't start again. She didn't know what that would look like, but she knew it had to start here, in this very moment. She wasn't going to wait for permission anymore. She was done being used. It was her time now. Slowly, Kira lifted her wings, feeling the soft tremor in her muscles as she stretched them out. The wind caught the edges of her feathers, ruffling them gently, as if urging her forward. She wasn't sure where she would go, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay here. With one last glance at the place that had been her prison, she began to walk. Her steps were slow at first, but with each movement, her heart grew a little lighter, her spirit a little stronger. She could feel the earth beneath her, steady and strong, supporting her every step. She wasn't going to ask for their permission anymore. She was free, and she would find her way home. Kira's wings fluttered with the effort of her first steps, a soft rustle in the quiet air. She could feel the weight of her past clinging to her, like the dust of the fields that clung to her skin. Each step was an act of defiance, a small rebellion against the years of silence and submission. The wind picked up as if recognizing her resolve. It swirled around her, tousling her hair, lifting her spirit higher, urging her forward. The path ahead was unclear, but there was a strange comfort in the uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for someone to catch her or pull her back. Her heart, though still fragile, began to beat with a new rhythm. She was no longer the thing they had made her into. She was more than the sum of what they had taken. She could feel it now, the strength in her bones, the power of the earth beneath her feet, and the fire that still flickered in her chest. The world stretched wide before her, endless and untamed. There were no walls here, no cages, only open sky and the promise of something better. She didn't know what it was yet, but she would find it. She moved through the grass, her feet light but steady, her wings half extended like the beginning of a flight. Her mind wandered, tracing the memories of her time in the hands of the humans. She remembered the cold, sterile places where they had kept her, the harsh words they had spoken, the way they used her as if she were nothing more than a tool for their convenience. But those memories, as sharp as they were, no longer had the power to bind her. They were the past, and she was moving forward. She could feel it in the air, the way the world seemed to sigh with relief as she left behind the weight of her past. "I won't be broken," she whispered to the wind, as though making a vow. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they were true. She had been bent, she had been used, but she had never broken, and she never would. As she walked further from the fields, the landscape began to change. The barren land gave way to rolling hills, and the air grew cooler, fresh with the scent of distant pine trees. There was life here, hidden beneath the surface of the earth, waiting for her to find it. She was close now, closer to something. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel the pull. The earth seemed to hum beneath her feet, a subtle vibration that matched the beat of her own heart. It was as if the world was calling her home. Kira paused, her wings slightly raised as she looked around. For the first time in ages, she felt a sense of peace. Not the stillness of resignation, but the quiet that came with the knowledge that she was in control of her own path now. Her eyes scanned the horizon, seeking something, anything, that would guide her. And then, just as the last of the sunlight dipped below the horizon, she saw it. A small village, nestled at the edge of the forest. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the soft glow of lanterns flickered in the windows. It was a place that seemed to hum with the same gentle energy that she had been feeling in the earth beneath her feet. She didn't know if they would accept her. She didn't know if they would even understand her. But she knew that for the first time in her life, she had a choice. And this place, this village, was as good a place to start as any. Her wings fluttered once more, this time with the promise of flight. She could feel the air filling her lungs, her spirit soaring higher. There was no turning back now. The path ahead was hers to choose. Kira took one more deep breath, her chest expanding with the possibility of what was to come. And then she began to walk towards the village. Her feet were light, her heart steady, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was moving toward something more than just survival. She was moving toward freedom. She was moving toward home. The village grew closer with each step, the sounds of life, laughter, voices calling to one another, the faint clink of tools and the hum of a quiet evening, rising in the air. Kira's heart fluttered in her chest. The village felt so different from everything she had known. It was a place where people seemed to live as though they were part of the earth, not separate from it. The warmth in the air wrapped around her, and for the first time it didn't feel cold, even though the evening was drawing near. Her wings, though still heavy with the weight of her past, lifted a little. Each step toward the village was a quiet victory, a soft reclaiming of what had been lost. She wasn't just walking. She was moving toward something new, something hers. As she reached the edge of the village, a small figure appeared from the shadows of a nearby building. a child, no more than 8 or 9, with wild, curly hair and wide eyes. They paused, staring at her for a long moment. Kira's heart stuttered. She had learned long ago to be wary of strangers, especially those who might view her as nothing more than a curiosity or, worse, a threat. But the child didn't run. They didn't flinch or shout for help. Instead, they simply stood there, watching her. Kira couldn't help but wonder if this child, with their innocent gaze, could see beyond the surface, see her for who she really was, not just the scars that marked her. "Who are you?" the child asked, their voice soft, but not fearful. Kira swallowed, her throat dry. She hadn't spoken to anyone in so long, and the sound of her own voice felt strange, as if she had forgotten how to use it. She hesitated, unsure how to explain herself. "I'm someone who's been lost. For a long time." The child didn't ask for more. They simply nodded, as if understanding more than Kira had given them credit for. After a moment, they stepped closer, their small hand reaching out, not in fear but in curiosity. "Are you like us?" the child asked. Kira blinked, confused. "Like you?" The child smiled, a soft, gentle smile that lit up their face. "You're not from here, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. My mama says that sometimes people get lost, but that doesn't mean they can't find their way home." The words hung in the air, as simple as they were profound. Kira's heart squeezed in her chest. For the first time in so long, she felt a tiny flicker of hope, like a spark in the darkness. I hope so," she whispered. "I really hope so." The child's smile widened. "Come with me. I'll take you to Mama. She's good at helping people." Without waiting for a response, the child turned and began walking into the village. Kira stood still for a moment, the weight of their words sinking in. This was different. This wasn't like the world she had known before. The air here was alive with possibility, with kindness, something she had almost forgotten existed. With a deep breath, Kira followed. She could feel the eyes of the village on her as she walked through the narrow streets, but they didn't feel harsh. There were no whispers of judgment, no cold stares, just curiosity, and a sense of belonging she hadn't known was possible. The child led her to a modest home at the edge of the village, a small, warm building with a garden out front. The scent of freshly baked bread and herbs filled the air. Kira's stomach growled, the first real sign of hunger she had felt in days. The child knocked lightly on the door before pushing it open. "Mama, someone's here." The door opened wider, and a woman stepped out. She was older than Kira, with weathered hands and kind, soft eyes. Her hair was graying at the temples, and her smile was warm and genuine. "Well now, what do we have here?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. Kira hesitated, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to explain everything that had brought her here. But the woman didn't seem to expect answers. She just stepped aside, opening the door wider, and gestured for Kira to come inside. "You look like you could use a meal and some rest," the woman said kindly. "Come in. We'll figure it out." Kira's heart fluttered in her chest, unsure of whether she was ready to let herself believe in this kindness. She had lived so long without it, and the idea of letting someone in was both terrifying and comforting all at once. But the woman's gaze was steady, and there was no judgment in her eyes, only the quiet promise of warmth, shelter, and safety. It was all too much, yet it was everything Kira had been longing for. With a shaky breath, Kira stepped inside. "I'll start by continuing the narrative and extending it to a satisfying conclusion, keeping the emotional depth and simplicity of language you requested. Here's the next section." Kira stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the house envelope her like a blanket. The woman closed the door behind her gently, as though not wanting to disturb the peace that hung in the air. The small home was simple, but it radiated comfort. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars of herbs, wooden bowls, and small trinkets that spoke of a life lived with care and purpose. There was a fire crackling softly in the hearth, its light dancing over the rough-hewn furniture, casting a golden glow on the woman who stood before her. "Sit," the woman said, gesturing to a low wooden bench near the fire. "You must be tired. We've all been there." Kira nodded, grateful but too exhausted to speak. She lowered herself onto the bench, her wings still heavy, aching from the long journey. Her muscles were sore, her mind clouded with the past. She had been running from it for so long, but now, in this moment, she couldn't help but let the weariness take over. She was too drained to keep her walls up any longer. The woman moved to the hearth, stirring a pot of stew that was simmering over the fire. The smell of vegetables, herbs, and something rich and savory made Kira's stomach growl. But it was more than that. It was the smell of home. It was the smell of safety, something Kira had long forgotten. "Don't worry," the woman said, glancing over her shoulder with a smile. "I won't let you go hungry." The woman's kindness washed over Kira, stirring something deep within her. She wanted to hold on to it, to let it heal the jagged pieces of her soul. She had been hurt for so long, used, cast aside as if she were nothing. But here, in this simple home, with the warmth of the fire and the kindness of a stranger, she felt something shift inside her. It was small at first, barely a whisper, but it was there. "Thank you," Kira said, her voice still quiet but sincere. I didn't think anyone would be kind to me again." The woman's hands moved deftly, stirring the pot before she set a bowl in front of Kira. She sat down across from her, her face soft with empathy. "People can surprise you. Don't give up on them just yet." Kira stared down at the bowl, steam rising from it in gentle curls. Her fingers shook slightly as she picked up the spoon, the simple act of eating feeling like an intimate gesture, one that required more trust than she had been willing to offer for so long. As she ate, the woman sat in silence, giving her space to process, to heal. There was no rush, no pressure. Kira appreciated that. It felt like the first time she could breathe without fear weighing on her chest. When the bowl was empty, the woman stood up and took it from her. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be a new day." Kira nodded, her eyelids heavy. The woman led her to a small room in the back of the house, a simple bed covered with soft blankets. It was the kind of bed Kira had dreamed of for so long, a place where she could lay her weary head and know she was safe. "Thank you," Kira whispered again, her voice barely audible. The woman gave her a kind smile. "You're welcome. Just rest now." Kira lay down, the softness of the blankets soothing against her skin. She closed her eyes, letting the fatigue take over, and for the first time in so long, she allowed herself to dream. There were no chains in her dreams, no cages or demands. There was only peace, and the warmth of a home she hadn't known she was looking for. The next morning, Kira woke to the sound of birds singing outside the window. The light of dawn was filtering through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. She stretched, her body aching in places she hadn't noticed the day before, but the pain was different now. It was the kind of pain that came from healing, not from surviving. The woman was already up when Kira made her way to the kitchen. She was stirring something in a pot, humming softly to herself. The child from the night before was sitting at the table, eating a piece of bread with honey. They looked up when Kira entered, a bright smile spreading across their face. "Good morning," the child said, their voice full of cheer. "Mama says we can go pick some berries today. You should come with us." Kira couldn't help but smile back. The simplicity of their life, the ease with which they offered kindness, was foreign to her. But it was also beautiful. It was what she had been searching for, without even realizing it. "That sounds nice," Kira said, her voice a little steadier than before. "I'd like that." The woman glanced over at Kira, a knowing look in her eyes. "You've had a long journey. You don't have to do anything you don't feel ready for." Kira nodded, grateful for the understanding. But something inside her, something that had been buried for so long, stirred. It was a feeling of being part of something, of being seen. She wanted to help, to contribute. She had spent so long being used, but now she wanted to offer something in return. "I'll help," Kira said, her voice more certain now. "I want to." The woman smiled warmly. "Then come along. The berries won't pick themselves." The day was spent wandering the woods, the three of them picking berries from the bushes that grew along the edges of the trees. Kira found herself laughing, something she hadn't done in years. The child's energy was infectious, and the woman's quiet, steady presence was a comfort. For the first time in so long, Kira felt like she belonged. She wasn't a tool. She wasn't an object. She was a person, and she was part of something. By the time the sun began to set, the baskets were full. The child, exhausted from the day's adventure, had fallen asleep on Kira's shoulder, their small body warm and peaceful. Kira looked down at the child, her heart swelling with a tenderness she hadn't known she was capable of. "Thank you," Kira whispered to the child. "You've shown me what it means to be free." The woman, who had been walking ahead of them, turned to look at Kira. Her face was soft with understanding. "You've been free all along, Kira. You just needed to remember it." Kira smiled, the weight of her past starting to feel lighter. She had been broken, used, and lost. But she had found something here, something she hadn't thought was possible. She had found kindness. She had found herself again, and for the first time, she believed in the possibility of home. Days turned into weeks. Kira became a part of the village, helping where she could, whether it was in the garden, collecting herbs, or teaching the children how to care for the land. She didn't have to be anything she wasn't. She could simply be. She could live. The people of the village had no grand expectations of her. They accepted her as she was, no questions asked, and in turn, she gave them all that she had. Slowly, the scars of her past began to fade, and her heart, once heavy with the pain of what had been, began to heal. Kira wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Kira stood on the edge of the village, looking out at the land she had come to love. The earth beneath her feet was solid, unwavering. The wind was gentle, and the world was quiet. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She wasn't lost anymore. She had found her way home.